But now, if you are seeing the ruling party trying to set aside 135 billion naira for lawsuits, what are they trying to insinuate? That shows that either can go ahead and announce results, even though that result does not reflect the people's popular will or the people's mandate.
Okay. Welcome this morning, Ofino.
Good morning, Yimi. I'm delighted to be here this morning.
Of course, I'm glad to have you as well. And the listeners, I'm sure they are glad to see your face one more time this week.
Wow, yes.
All right, let's start with this question, because when I read the story, I was a bit surprised. 135 billion naira. And then a lot of Nigerians are asking questions. Is it that we are expecting a lot of court cases after the election? Do you think this price, this money, this budget, do you think is inflated? Do you think is necessary or necessary?
It's rather sad and unfortunate we are trying to adopt what we call preemptive approach towards 2027 election. Electoral victory should be determined at the poll, not in court. If elections are credible, free and fair, results will be determined at the polls, not in court. But because there is what we call injustice, lack of transparency, electoral fraud at the poll, that is why those who are aggrieved resort to the court. When you resort to the court, you are going to pay more. 135 billion naira being set aside as lawsuit by INEC for future court litigation towards 2027 general election, to me, is unacceptable. INEC should find a way of organizing credible, free and fair election in 2027, to the extent that the loser will accept defeat in good faith. The winner will celebrate magnanimously, while the loser will also accept the result in good faith.
Okay, but Ofino, over time, I think for the last 10, 15 years now, we've been budgeting a certain amount for election lawsuits. So this is not the first time.
Yes, it's unprecedented in the history of Nigeria, especially in 2023 general election. The court litigations. Court cases are not free. Both the defendant and the litigant, you have to pay. It's at a cost. But here now, when we are talking about the statutory budget for INEC, that statutory budget comes from where? It comes from the taxpayers' money. And when you are talking about the taxpayer money, you are talking about Nigerian money, public funds. So we have to be frank and sincere to ourselves. It's unacceptable. INEC should find a way of organizing free, fair and credible election that will be devoid of what? Court litigation. Though we cannot have what we call zero court litigation. It's not possible for you to have. It's not possible. We see how some people, they know that they have lost that election. But because they want to embarrass the winner, morally, they will not go to court. Because they have the money to spend.
Okay, so there's this argument, brought to the fore by this popular economist, Apart Tommy. He said if individuals, decide to run for elections, now why is it that it's the federal government that is, setting aside a budget for election lawsuit? Why is it that we cannot entrench that budget into the INEC's budget? Especially now that they've decided to increase their budget. Over time, initially it was not even up to 400 billion naira. Now we have about 887 billion naira set aside for the 2027 elections. So he's arguing that why can't we have that under the budget of INEC? Why is the federal government setting aside another huge amount of money for elections?
There's one thing you must understand, that INEC is not a revenue generating agency.
Okay.
It's not a revenue generating agency. It's a statutory body established by law to conduct free, fair and credible election. Because Nigeria is a democratic state. It's not a lawless state. Democracy comes from the people. Government of the people, by the people and for the people. And there must be an electoral umpire. And there must be a statutory budget. for INEC in order to run a smooth and fair general election for the country, so that the people can be able to decide who is going to govern them for each specific term or tenure in office. But the issue there is this: the federal government, sometimes they want to manipulate INEC. Probably that was why Professor Pat Utomi, a renowned economist, is trying to suggest that it is necessary for it to go by the way of the INEC statutory budget that is going to be approved by the National Assembly. But now, if you are seeing the ruling party trying to set aside 135 billion naira for lawsuits, what are they trying to insinuate? That shows that INEC can go ahead and announce results, even though that result does not reflect the people's popular will or the people's mandate. So what do you suggest? That shows that the so-called ruling government too, they have an interest. So probably that was why Professor Pat Utomi was raising objection.
But Philo, if we budget 873.78 billion naira for these elections that we are preparing for, and then if you look at the last budget for the election, 2023 elections, it was around 313.4 billion naira. Look at the increase, 873 billion naira.
There is one thing you must consider, Yini.
So if we spend that amount, if you are going to spend that amount for elections, and we are still trying to budget 135 billion naira for a country that is broke, according to some Nigerians, are we not doing too much?
Yini, look at the inflationary trend. There is one thing you must understand. Ballot papers are not printed in Nigeria. I don't want to mention the name of the country where Nigerian ballot papers are being printed. It's outside the country. Capital outflow. What stops Nigeria printing the ballot paper here in Nigeria? Probably they are afraid. You know, the political system in Nigeria, they might decide to set the publishing company ablaze. Ballot papers are printed outside this country. And when they are being printed outside this, that shows that you are going to pay in dollars. You have to look at the exchange rate. Probably that is why there was an increase. But that increase is too outrageous. Now, how honest is INEC? And how honest is the federal government? You know, we are talking about what we call inflated budget. It's a problem in Nigeria, corruption. Now, let me give you an instance. If 1 kilometer of road is costing 1 million naira, and government is awarding the road for 2 million naira, you know what has happened? Government has defrauded the people 1 million naira. And government has also succeeded in denying and depriving the people 1 kilometer additional road. How honest is the federal government? How honest is also INEC? Is their budget not being overinflated? Is their budget not inflated? Is their budget not being padded? Now, when we are talking about logistics, fine. INEC is going to contract what we call ad hoc staff. INEC has what we call statutory staff that are under federal government payroll as federal staff. Those that work in INEC as permanent staff, as civil servants. We have civil servants working in INEC. They are also federal staff too. But we have what we call ad hoc staff that are being contracted during electoral cycle. That is when you contract them. They have to be paid allowances. Then the corpers too have to be paid the allowances. But what about the issue of cubicles? You know, we cannot be buying polling cubicles all the time. We have 774 local governments in Nigeria. Under each local government, there are what we call polling units. We have wards, electoral wards. We have polling units too, where you can be able to cast your vote. And we now buy what we call the box, ballot box. Those ballot boxes, we should ask questions. Are you buying new ones again? Because they are property. They are permanent property.
That you can use over
you can use over time.
Consistently.
The ballot box, the cubicle too, the voting, the polling.
Beavers.
Yeah,
what about the beavers?
What about the beavers too? They are permanent what? Properties. Are we saying that you are still going to buy a new beavers again? Are you going to buy a new card reader again? The only thing I know you are going to do for me is the ballot papers, the EC form. you have to print a new one again.
Another argument is transportation. They think they are going to spend, especially now that the fuel is expensive. So, you know, INEC will always disburse materials
We have been working
elections.
in tandem with the Nigerian Union, National Union of Road Transport Workers, NURTW. If not that we are not a serious country. Do you know that NURTW too, they are also partisan?
How?
They are partisan. Go and ask in Nigeria, they are partisan. Most of the ruling government at the state level always want to determine who becomes the NURTW chairman in their various states. Someone that is partisan, you want him to transport what we call electoral logistics. You are not being fair. That is why it will be very difficult for us to have a free and fair election. What stopped the federal government purchasing buses for INEC? That this is going to be INEC buses in Nigeria.
That's going to, you know, amount to another budget.
It doesn't count. Nigerians want credible election. Our elections have never been credible except the one of 1993 June 12 presidential election, and that election was annulled. It has been the freest. Other subsequent elections, there has been a series of violence. Now what we are having is vote buying.
Okay, let's talk about, speaking about vote buying now, let's link it to this issue. Femi Falana-Osan, decided to actually, speak on this matter. And he said, a lawyer will not take more than 3 million naira per brief. And that's even for a senior advocate. So he doesn't understand why 135 billion naira is being set aside for election laws. So he said, per brief, a senior advocate should not take more than 3 million naira. So why are we, why are we budgeting that amount for election lawsuits?
What stops us organizing a free, fair, and credible election without court litigation? Who says it's not possible? It's possible. It is possible. But because when you look at the political class we are having in Nigeria today, they are so desperate for power. They don't care about us. What they are more interested is about power, wealth, and fame. You know that you lost the election, that the election was even free and fair. You are still going to court just to rubbish INEC. Do you know that it does not speak well? If INEC conduct election and at the end of the day there are series of what? Court litigation, that shows that INEC's reputation is at stake. That's the truth on moral ground. So there is one thing we must understand in this country. How do we organize election that is free, fair, and credible without court litigation? And if at all if there is going to be court litigation, it's going to be minimal. Okay,
Ofino, whose fault is that? Because over time we've seen it at the polling unit where even some INEC officials were arrested. There was a situation in the last election, presidential election, a professor of a particular university was arrested. Why? Because of certain things that he did at that point in time.
Akwa Ibom State. So the professor is presently in jail.
So what do you make of that?
He was the one that rigged the election for Senate President, Senator Godswill Akpabio. I don't know why the Senate President is still there.
Allegedly, Ofino.
I said the professor is in jail.
Right.
He has been convicted.
Okay.
He has been convicted.
Okay.
So the Senate President is not supposed to be on that seat in a Senate climb. We have to be frank and sincere to ourselves. Can my friend, President Donald Trump, invite the Senate President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to the White House for a breakfast coffee? It's not possible.
Ofino, what about INEC officials that were also arrested? Some of them even worked with, some persons, let me say maybe party representatives now.
That is why we are saying that how independent is INEC? So that work, it calls for morality. An electoral umpire that must be what? Honest. A man of integrity. But that is what you must understand. Honesty and integrity, they are relative. Ofino can choose to be a honest person because my reputation is at stake. And I can also choose to become a dishonest person. But there should be reward for honesty. And there should be consequence for dishonesty. That is how it should be done in a saner society. But in this country, I've seen cases in which INEC will take side and INEC will be telling the loser, go to court. When the loser knows that...
It's not only INEC that says that. Even politicians, they'll tell you, go to
court.
Okay.
Is it supposed to be? It's not supposed to be. Adams Oshomole took back his mandate through the court. He took back his mandate through the court.
Do you know Binani? Some persons, Binani was announced,
Yes,
at some point.
Adamawa State.
Exactly. That's another issue.
It was a sensitive issue in Nigeria. One of the most sensitive issues. Where is the INEC chairman, the resident commissioner for INEC in Adamawa State? And where is that man today? Nowhere to be found. You cannot rule out the finger of conspiracy from the angle of the presidency. So that there is a big problem. That is why people like us are saying and advocating that it is morally wrong for the president to appoint the INEC chairman. And you don't blame the president, it's the Electoral Act. Why? Those who are representing us at the National Assembly are to blame. Not even the president. The executive arm of government, the legislative arm of government, they are politicians. They have political interests. It is only the third arm of government, the judiciary, that are what? Legal experts. They are professionals and technocrats. All things being equal, centeris paribus, I feel they are the ones to be in the best position on moral ground to be the electoral umpire because they are not politicians. But here in Nigeria, look at it now. The executive has been given the constitutional power as a result of the Electoral Act to appoint the INEC boss. Is that fair? Is that just?
Okay, Ofino now.
The people are there to judge.
Apart from INEC issue now, INEC issue now, let's talk about other factors. Because in 2023, we experienced, serious, court cases. That's the highest we've seen in the last, especially after, we returned from, the military era and then we entered into democracy. 2023, we experienced serious, election cases. So what factors, apart from the INEC issue, do you think led to that? Apart from INEC now. Because people are asking, what is the role of political parties in all of this?
Series of issues led to that. The criminal record of the president was also a factor. You remember Alhaji Atiku Abubakar? He went as far as the United States to file a suit concerning the issue of Chicago certificate of the president.
Reno Mercury also went to Chicago.
They brought the certificate. The evidence was there. But when they now tendered it, they said it was what? Too late. That was a conspiracy on the part of the Supreme Court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That is why sometimes my heart bleeds. I'm not surprised if my friend, President Donald Trump of the United States, is not interested in inviting any of the Nigerian political leaders to the White House.
His wife went there recently.
It doesn't count.
The wife of the president.
It doesn't count. The wife may be there.
She was appreciated.
It doesn't count.
She was welcomed.
It doesn't count. We are talking about the Nigerian president.
Okay.
The president of the most populous black nation on earth.
Okay.
Wasn't invited. There is one thing you must understand. The white men, they are looking for a leaders that can be trusted. Leaders with good track record. Nigeria's image internationally under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is in disrepute. I'm not trying to discredit the president.
Okay.
But Nigerians should vote wisely. It becomes sad to me if the US president refused to invite our own president to the White House. Don't you know that it's a show of shame and a slap?
He's not the first person. Buhari was not invited. Not even the wife.
Buhari came. Do you know Buhari was invited when Donald Trump was there first time? 2016. When Donald Trump was first elected as president of the United States, 2016 to 2020. That was why he said shithole. If you remember. He was invited. So there are issues on ground. So when we are talking about speaking truth to power, we are saying nothing but the truth. There is one thing I've learned in life.
Ofino, was Jonathan invited?
Whether Jonathan was invited or he wasn't invited is not the issue. The reputation of the country is at stake.
No, it's the
because
issue
of the leaders you are voting.
Okay.
Do you know what it means? If the White House refused to invite your president,
Should it count for anything?
it counts.
Okay.
America is the most powerful country in the world. It counts.
So now that Tinubu has not been invited, should we stop this entire country and put a hold on the country?
No, the ball now lies in the court of Nigerians to decide who they want to lead them in 2027. We have to be honest to ourselves. The presidential system of government that is being run in this country was adopted from where? From America. From America. And there is one thing we must understand. So when we are talking about court litigation, the criminal record of the president was one of the reasons for that court litigation, even beyond the shores of Nigeria. And don't be surprised, my friend Donald Trump will definitely open the case again. It's going to be a shocker.
Okay, Ofino,
to Nigeria.
Another case, or let me say another issue we experienced during 2023 after the election is the FCT dichotomy. So, I mean, according to the Constitution, the president must actually fulfill certain things before he can be declared, the president. And that includes that winning the election in some states, 24 states, including the FCT. So when they took the matter to the court, because President Bola Ahmed Tinubu did not win FCT, and then it was interpreted that FCT is seen as a state when it comes to election, and that the opposition party said, no, we are not going to take that. FCT is standing alone. And so the court said, you cannot say FCT is standing alone, because by saying that, you are trying to tell Nigerians that people of the FCT, I mean, residents of FCT are superior to other persons in other states. So it was an issue. So how do you think we can avoid something like that in this election that we are preparing for?
It was a fallacy of the first order. FCT is not a state in Nigeria. We are having 36 states of the federation. I did not read law. Assuming I was having the opportunity to read law, I will become a constitutional lawyer. The Nigerian Constitution, page by page, clause by clause, would have been my PhD thesis. We have to be frank and sincere to ourselves. The election was supposed to be declared inconclusive. There was supposed to be a rerun. But because they never wanted the country to degenerate into chaos. But it's still wrong. FCT is not a state. Do you know that if FCT was a state, FCT is made up of 6 local governments. Okay. The aborigines of FCT, none of them have been appointed as the FCT minister. Are you not surprised? This was the first time a Southerner was being appointed as the FCT minister. And we knew how the North raised objection against Nyesom Wike. But thank God that Nyesom Wike came from the oil-producing state of Nigeria. The people of Niger Delta rose up and defended their son. I'm telling you, FCT is not a state.
But the courts interpreted FCT
probably
as a state.
It's our law system in Nigeria. Is it a good model before the rest of the world? Is it a model?
How can we avoid something like that, even as we prepare?
I'm not a law student.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
But assuming I was having the opportunity to read law, there are critical questions I'm going to ask. Because in mathematics, 1 + 1 is 2 all over the world. But why are we having controversial judgment in Nigeria and we are celebrating? How many Nigerians today can be nominated to become a member of the International Criminal Court at the Hague, Netherlands? Those are the questions we should ask. How many Nigerian judges today can be recommended? That we want this Nigerian judge to be recommended at the ICJ, Hague, Netherlands. They don't care. In Nigeria today, we have corrupt judges. Judges are not supposed to be corrupt. A just judge will deliver a just judgment. An unjust judge cannot deliver a just judgment. Most of our judges today, they are corrupt. Lawyers, corrupt. Look at the issue of plea bargaining. If plea bargaining happen to be a norm in law, why can't we expunge it in Nigeria and introduce it as a model before the rest of the world? That if they are practicing plea bargaining in other nations of the world, including Western nations, we in Nigeria will never adopt plea bargaining, because plea bargaining is also a subtle way of corruption. Okay. Somebody stole 1 million naira. So with the plea bargaining, he now negotiates. He's going to return 500,000. The 500,000 goes back to him.
Okay, so Ofino now.
Is that not corruption?
Because we need to conclude.
In law, they say it's not corruption, it's plea bargaining.
Okay, we need to conclude now. What do you think INEC should do differently, especially with the increase in the number of court cases that we dealt with in 2023, and not just INEC now? What should INEC do differently? What should the entire system, I mean the judiciary now, do differently in terms of preparing for the next election?
Everyone has a role to play, but it is INEC that will determine who wins the election. But the people's mandates must never be stolen. That is germane. I will appeal to Nigerians, especially those who are here to collect their PVC. Go and collect your permanent voter's card. Voting is your what? Is your what? civic responsibility as citizens of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And for those who have the PVC, but they often refuse to cast their vote, you are not being patriotic. The time has come for you to come and exercise your civic responsibility by voting. But INEC also must ensure that beavers do not fail this time around.
But INEC has said over time that beavers' failure is not entirely their fault. It can happen due to
there can be what called the finger of conspiracy.
The
finger of conspiracy cannot be ruled out. Anything can be hacked. You remember Hush Puppy? We remember Hush Puppy. He was hacking a lot of accounts in the world. So anything can be hacked. When it comes to the issue of technology, technology can be hacked, it can be stolen. So INEC must ensure that we conduct credible, free and fair election under the leadership of Professor Joash Amukpitan, a senior advocate of Nigeria. This is a test run for him. His reputation is at stake. Though there is one particular minister, the former minister of sport, Dalong, who also raised an issue concerning the INEC boss. That when he was the dean of law, that there were certain students who were actually at the level of 2-1. At the end of the day, what happened? They now brought them down to 2-2. I was not there. That was what Dalong said. He said, such a man, can he be trusted?
No, was it stipulated the reasons why they dropped from 2-1 to 2-2?
No, it was a conspiracy according to them. You know,
okay.
in PhD,
certain things can make you drop.
When you are running master's program, they will tell you that this normal distribution curve, you know the normal distribution curve. Therefore, PhD, those who are going to have PhD grade, they are going to skew to the left. That is why when you are having 100 masters in a master's class, you are having 100 students in a master's class. Don't be surprised. It can only be 4 or 5 persons attaining PhD grade.
Yes, because of their results.
Conspiracy is there on quota system.
Apart from that, we have also seen cases where some of them could not proceed because of their, especially because of their final year project. That's
no, I'm talking about the master's level, having a PhD grade from
even masters. You write project, you write thesis.
Yeah, apart from your thesis. Yeah. So the conspiracy is there. It's among them, they know.
So, if your thesis is not good enough,
not even the thesis.
Should you be allowed
I'm talking about ASU. I stand to be corrected.
ASU?
Yes!
Okay.
The professors.
Okay.
They do it. Okay. If you are not loyal to some persons, they will not allow you to have a PhD grade.
But you should not also rule out the fact that some persons cannot proceed because, I mean...
Tell me now, when you have terminal masters, you cannot proceed.
Ofino, university will award you a degree based on character and learning. So I've seen it not just as a master's level, now, even at the undergraduate
level. Are we not having random professors?
If you do not
Are we not having random professors?
What? Okay,
are we not having random professors?
But we should also...
Who are what now to ladies?
Ofino, that happens. But we should balance it. At some point, people also are not allowed to progress.
The man made an observation for Nigeria that he does not believe that Professor Joash Amukpitan.
It's a good argument.
Yes, can really conduct
we need to go
a free and fair election.
We need to go because of time. We'll revisit this. I just want to balance that aspect that some persons are not allowed to proceed because they are not fit to. We cannot afford to say we want to be good to people and then allow some persons to graduate or have a degree when they do not qualify for it.
Yes, I know.
Exactly. It's a fine place to leave it, Ofino, but that's a good argument. We need to go. When the price of justice rises beyond the reach of citizens, democracy pays the ultimate cost. Today's conversation reveals a deeper truth. The rising cost of election litigation is not just a budgetary issue. It's a governance issue, a trust issue, and a sustainability issue. The proposed 135 billion naira forces us to confront what kind of democracy we are building, one strengthened by justice or one sustained by endless, costly legal battles. If democracy is to remain rooted in the will of the people, then both elections and the pursuit of justice must be accessible, transparent, and affordable. This has been The Big Story. I'm Oluwayemi Adelako. Thank you for staying with us. And as always, the national conversation continues. We take a short break. We'll be right back.